30 hours ago, the United States announced expanded naval escorts for commercial shipping through the Gulf, according to Reuters. Within hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps warned that any escalation of foreign military presence in the Strait of Hormuz would be met with what the IRGC called a proportional response, per BBC reporting. This is what Reuters and the BBC reported on April 28. The hours that follow will determine whether the report holds, the framing holds, or both shift. The next 7 days carry a hard deadline. Emergency Gulf security consultations involving the United States and regional allies are scheduled inside that window, and that is the pressure point this analysis is built around. But the story does not end at the headline. Reuters reports that roughly 30% of global seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. And Al Jazeera reports that maritime insurance premiums for tankers transiting the strait have already risen by approximately 20% in response to the heightened risk profile. Those two numbers tell you why this is not a regional spat. It is a global supply chain pressure point. And here is the layer most coverage is missing. The escort posture itself, not any single incident, is what redraws the risk map. Stay with me. In the next 15 minutes, 3 things will become clear. Why the destroyer repositioning reframes what freedom of navigation actually means in practice for tanker traffic. Why a 20% insurance premium move makes a sustained standoff more likely, not less. And why the 7-day Gulf consultation window is the variable most market commentary is not pricing in correctly. This is BriefOx. Here is how the sourcing breaks down. Transparency on this matters more than confidence. Reuters reported the expanded escort posture and confirmed that at least 2 United States destroyers have been repositioned closer to Hormuz choke points. The BBC reported the IRGC's warning that any escalation of foreign naval presence would trigger a proportional response. And the BBC also cited Iranian officials describing the United States move as a violation of regional security norms. Al Jazeera, citing maritime industry sources, reported the roughly 20% rise in tanker insurance premiums. Where these accounts diverge, this analysis says so. Where a figure is preliminary, this analysis flags it. The situation is fluid, and the audience deserves to know which claims are anchored and which are still developing. Quick note before we go deeper. If you are new to BriefOx, this channel covers conflict, strategy, and geopolitical risk with sourcing discipline most channels skip. Subscribing takes 2 seconds, and the bell makes sure the next analysis reaches you when it matters. Now, back to what just happened in the Gulf. Let us start with what is being reported and how firmly. The opening fact, per Reuters, is that the United States Navy has begun coordinating escorted transit corridors for commercial vessels through the Gulf. Reuters places the announcement on April 28. The same Reuters reporting confirms that at least 2 United States destroyers have been repositioned closer to Hormuz choke points. Treat the destroyer count as a floor, not a ceiling. The figure is single-sourced at the time of broadcast, and additional repositioning may not yet be public. Within hours of the United States announcement, the BBC reported a public response from Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC stated that any escalation of foreign naval presence in the Strait of Hormuz would trigger what the IRGC described as a proportional response. The BBC also cites Iranian officials describing the United States move as a violation of regional security norms. The exact wording of the IRGC statement is being reported, not independently verified by this analysis, and the report remains uncorroborated by other major outlets so far at this level of granularity. Al Jazeera, reporting on April 29, layers in the market signal. Per Al Jazeera, maritime insurers have raised premiums for tankers transiting the strait by approximately 20% in response to the perceived risk. That figure has not been independently corroborated outside Al Jazeera at the time of broadcast, but it is consistent with the direction of travel implied by the other 2 outlets. The brief frames this as a sharpened United States posture, meeting a sharpened Iranian counter-warning. The broader public record across Reuters, the BBC, and Al Jazeera shows a longer arc of intermittent Gulf tension stretching back years, with this episode sitting on the higher end of that arc rather than as a clean break from it. Both layers are on the table here. Those are the contours of what is being reported. Now the analysis, separated cleanly. In 2019, when tanker incidents in the Gulf last drew sustained United States attention, the response was largely limited to coalition monitoring and unilateral patrol increases. The escort architecture stayed informal. If the current Reuters reporting holds, the pattern breaks for three reasons. First, escorted transit corridors, as Reuters describes them, are a more formal and more visible commitment than monitoring. Escort corridors put United States hulls in the same water column as commercial cargo on a predictable schedule, which raises both deterrence and risk surface in the same motion. Second, the BBC's reporting on the IRGC response is not a generic warning. The IRGC framing, as the BBC reports it, treats the United States move itself as the trigger threshold, not any specific incident. That language, if accurately reported, narrows the off-ramps available to both sides. Third, the Al Jazeera reporting on insurance premiums signals that the commercial layer is already pricing in sustained risk, which feeds back into the political layer by raising the cost of inaction for governments dependent on Gulf flows. This is not unprecedented. Gulf escort operations have a long lineage, including the Reagan-era reflagging of Kuwaiti tankers in the late 1980s. So the structural shift is not that escorts exist. The shift, if the reporting holds, is that escorts are being announced as policy in a moment when the Iranian counter-posture is being declared as an explicit red line. Those two announcements stacked on each other inside roughly 30 hours is the pattern that is new, not the underlying tools. That is the structural shift the reporting would imply. Now the math, with the same caveat. None of these implications are stronger than the sources they rest on, and the sources are still moving. Let us talk about what the numbers in the brief actually show and how confident we can be in them. Destroyer repositioning. 2 United States destroyers moved closer to Hormuz choke points, per Reuters. This figure is single-sourced at the time of broadcast and should be treated as a confirmed minimum, not a confirmed total. Additional repositioning may already be in motion and simply not yet announced. Insurance premium move. A roughly 20% rise in maritime insurance premiums for tankers transiting the Strait, per Al Jazeera. The 20% figure is approximate by Al Jazeera's own framing. Treat the direction as solid and the exact magnitude as preliminary. Hormuz throughput. Roughly 30% of global seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, per Reuters, consistent with long-standing United States Energy Information Administration estimates in the public record. This number is the most stable in the brief, and it is the one that converts a regional naval story into a global supply chain story. Time since last redeployment. Approximately 48 hours since the previous naval redeployment announcement, per the BBC. That cadence matters. A 48-hour rhythm of announcements is short enough to indicate active posture management, not a one-off gesture. Consultation window. 7 days until the scheduled emergency Gulf security consultations involving the United States and regional allies, per Reuters. That window is the deadline this analysis is built around. These numbers are not academic. If they hold, they are the constraints inside which decisions get made. If any of them shift, the analysis below shifts with them. In particular, if the destroyer count revises upward, or if the insurance figure firms beyond Al Jazeera's sourcing, the muddle-through scenario gets harder to sustain. The United States Navy can sustain escort operations through Hormuz from existing Fifth Fleet infrastructure in Bahrain. The United States Navy cannot, however, guarantee zero-incident transit because escort presence raises the visibility of any contact and shrinks the margin for misread maneuvers at sea. Iran's IRGC can, per the BBC's reporting, escalate harassment, sortie fast attack craft, or stage missile drills in the vicinity of Hormuz to demonstrate the proportional response posture. The IRGC cannot, on the current evidence, close the Strait of Hormuz outright without absorbing severe economic damage to Iran's own oil exports, which transit the same waters. Claims of imminent Hormuz closure are circulating, but they are not confirmed by the Tier 1 outlets cited in this brief. Regional Gulf states can quietly host the consultations Reuters references and signal alignment with the United States escort posture. Those same states cannot publicly endorse a confrontational footing without inviting Iranian retaliation against their own energy infrastructure. That is why back-channel routes, including Omani mediation, tend to carry more weight in this corridor than public statements. Commercial shipping operators can reroute around the strait via longer pathways, but cannot do so without absorbing significant time and fuel costs that translate directly into the insurance premium move, Al Jazeera reports. That asymmetry is what shapes the next 72 hours, regardless of how the disputed details land. Capability and constraint, not rhetoric, set the actual decision space. Scenario 1. A managed step-down. Probability, roughly 25%. In this path, back-channel talks via Oman or another regional intermediary clarify the rules of the escort regime. The United States narrows the public visibility of escort operations, and Iran tones down the IRGC framing without retracting it. This could happen because both sides have demonstrable interest in keeping the strait open, with roughly 30% of global seaborne oil passing through it per Reuters, and because the 7-day consultation window itself creates a natural off-ramp. It might not happen because the IRGC's framing, as reported by the BBC, ties the United States move itself to the threshold for response, which leaves less room for quiet adjustment than past episodes allowed. Verdict: plausible, but it requires both sides to spend political capital quietly, which is the harder kind to spend. Scenario 2. Muddle through with elevated friction. Probability, roughly 50%. In this path, United States escorts continue, Iranian warnings continue, the IRGC stages exercises in adjacent waters, and tanker traffic keeps moving with insurance premiums elevated near or above the 20% rise, Al Jazeera reports. This could happen because the existing equilibrium is uncomfortable but functional for both sides, with the United States preserving freedom of navigation language and Iran preserving its red line language. It might not happen if a single contact incident at sea between an escort and an Iranian patrol craft escalates faster than either chain of command can manage, which is exactly the scenario escort operations historically have struggled to fully prevent. Verdict: this is the path of least resistance for governments and the path of greatest cumulative cost for shippers and insurers. Scenario 3. A discrete confrontation event. Probability, roughly 25%. In this path, the IRGC harasses or attempts to interdict an escorted tanker. The United States Navy responds under existing rules of engagement, and the incident forces both governments into reactive posture for days. This could happen because escort operations compress the geometry between the two navies, and because the IRGC's stated proportional response language, per the BBC, lowers the bar for what counts as a triggering provocation. It might not happen because both sides retain operational discipline at the unit level, and because the economic blowback of a confirmed naval clash would be severe for Iran's revenues and for global energy markets simultaneously. Verdict: not the base case, but a 25% tail is not a tail you ignore in a 7-day window. There is no clean fourth scenario where the underlying tension simply disappears. The variables above are the variables, even if the specific trigger event in today's reporting turns out to look different on closer inspection. 3 signals will tell you which scenario is unfolding. Watch for additional United States naval deployments into the Gulf beyond the 2 destroyers Reuters has confirmed. That would point to the muddle-through scenario hardening into a sustained escort regime rather than a brief signaling exercise. Watch for Iranian naval exercises or missile drills near Hormuz inside the next 72 hours. That would suggest the escalation scenario is gaining weight, particularly if the drills are timed to coincide with the 7-day consultation window. Watch for a sharp move in Brent crude pricing or a visible rerouting of tanker traffic away from Hormuz toward longer pathways, both of which would confirm that commercial actors are pricing in the escalation tail rather than the muddle-through base case. These signals are observable. They are how the audience can stress test today's reporting against tomorrow's reality. Each of them sits in the open record. None requires inside sourcing to read. 30 hours ago, the United States announced expanded naval escorts for Gulf shipping, per Reuters, and within hours, Iran's IRGC declared any escalation of foreign naval presence a trigger for proportional response, per the BBC. What you now have, that the headline version does not give you, the structural shift, conditional on the reporting holding, escort architectures stacked against an explicit Iranian red line inside a 30-hour window, is a tighter geometry than the 2019 episode produced. The numbers, with confidence levels noted: 2 destroyers repositioned at minimum, a roughly 20% insurance premium move that is directionally clear and magnitudinally preliminary, 30% of global seaborne oil exposure unchanged. The most likely path: muddle through with elevated friction, at roughly 50%. None of this is prediction. It is the shape of the decision space as the current evidence allows. If the evidence shifts, the shape shifts. Drop a comment. Of the 3 scenarios, which one do you think is unfolding, and which signal are you watching for? If this breakdown helped you see the situation more clearly than the headline version did, share it with one person who needs the same clarity. The comment section under BriefOx videos tends to surface signals faster than the news cycle does, and the people watching alongside you are part of how this analysis stays sharp. Subscribe if you have not. Hit the bell so the next analysis reaches you when it matters. This is BriefOx. Stay informed, stay precise.